I think I might have been too excited about my original first thoughts on the press release of the Mac Mini M2 and the M2 Pro, and maybe got it wrong when I quickly compared the base model Mac Studio and the one I was thinking of buying if I were to upgrade, until I looked at the price. Hence my dilemma. Let's talk about it. Thank you for joining me for another video. I'm Ryan, and I was so excited about the Mac Mini M2 and the M2 Pro, which at the time of this video release should be available today. I have the Mac Mini M1 with 16 gigabytes of unified memory or RAM, and I absolutely love it, and has been the absolute workhorse of this YouTube channel, my day-to-day, live streaming on Zoom for meetings, and like many of you, when the Mac Studio was announced, I was expecting and actually made a video predicting that Apple, during that event, was going to introduce a new Mac Mini, and instead, we got the Mac Studio. I'll be honest, I saw that the Mac Studio with that M1 Max and also the Ultra with front ports had the same footprint as the Mac Mini, just taller, was so tempting to buy and tempting me to upgrade. The new Mac Studio, however, did not have the entry-level price of the Mac Mini and was priced a bit higher. So a few things came to my mind. The Mac Mini lineup was not being replaced by the Mac Studio based on the price point. This was almost like a creative computer that is the entry Mac Pro or replacement for creators that want more than a Mac Mini, but just can't afford or want to buy the Mac Pro. The other thing that came to my mind, as I was absolutely sure that Apple was eventually going to update their entry-level lineup and give us a Mac Mini with a newer chipset with the M2 or M2 Pro, and here it is. I've gotten a lot of questions lately about which Mac Mini to get, the Mac Studio, Mac Mini M2, or the M2 Pro, or coming from an Intel Mac Mini to find a decently priced Mac Mini M1. I personally had a dilemma between the Mac Mini M2 Pro and the base model Mac Studio since the press release. My first initial reaction and thoughts were, of course, the Mac Mini M2 Pro all day long based on the pricing I originally looked at and showed on my last video, which if you haven't watched, I will have a link in the description below. I then compared that price to the Mac Studio. So before we look at pricing and give you more context other than price, I want to share what I like about the Mac Mini in comparison to the Mac Studio because both look great and have great advantages. First, the form factor of the Mac Mini design is tried and true, and my M1 is completely silent. And I have never heard the fans go off and is out of sight and out of mind. The Mac Studio has the same footprint, a little taller, basically twice the height of the Mac Mini, and yes, the Mac Studio does have front ports that are easily accessible and very useful, especially if you are transferring footage and data through USB-C or an SD card. One thing that I love about the Mac Mini though, it works. The thermal and cooling with the M1 is solid and I don't have to think about it. The Mac Studio is a brand new design with a brand new cooling system that takes air in and blows air out. And there are various holes to keep the airflow, which also introduces areas for dust to build up, which I would think you do need to be aware of and have to clean out once in a while. I feel that time will tell how efficient or problematic this design can be. If anything, it would be great to have a Mac Mini with some front ports in the future. Before we jump into the Mac Mini M2 Pro build that I created, let's take a look at what the current base model Mac Studio is priced at and what it gives you. The Mac Studio base model, just to remind everyone, is equipped with the M1 Max with 10-core CPU, 24-core GPU, and a 32GB unified memory or RAM with 512 SSD storage. The M1 Max is advertised to deliver 400 gigabytes per second memory bandwidth. That is fast and doesn't necessarily compare the speed in real scenarios compared to the new M2 Pro. You do get the 2 front USB-C ports and 1 SD card slot. In the back, you get 4 Thunderbolt 4 ports, 2 USB-A ports, 1 HDMI 2.0 port, older standard, which can only give you up to 4K at 60 Hz refresh rate, and 1 10 gigabyte Ethernet port and a 3.5 millimeter headphone jack for $19.99 US. Okay, that is out of the way. Let's get to a few things I found when I started building my Mac Mini M2 Pro machine and started adding upgrades compared to the Mac Studio. For me and what I do, I would keep the base configuration of the Apple M2 Pro 10-core CPU and 16-core GPU and opt out of upgrading to that 12-core CPU and 19-core GPU. Right off the bat though, even if I were to upgrade, I would get more CPU cores and I would still have fewer GPU cores compared to the Mac Studio. Coming from the Mac Mini M1, I would get more CPU cores and GPU cores with the base model Mac Mini M2 Pro. I personally don't think I would take advantage of the 19 GPU cores for my use case. The Mac Mini M2 Pro doesn't have front ports and has the same rear ports as the Mac Studio, with a main difference that HDMI is a 2.1 port versus the old standard on the Mac Studio. The Mac Mini M2 Pro will support up to 3 monitors versus 5 monitors with the Mac Studio. And note, the M2 Pro is faster than the M1 chipset with 200 gigabytes per second of memory bandwidth, but the M2 Pro is still 50% slower than the M1 Max, and again, might not translate to be faster in real-world use. I wanted to note it for this comparison because I know some of you would catch that on the Apple website. I personally would upgrade the unified memory or RAM to 32 gigabytes, and I personally would upgrade the SSD to 1 terabyte. You might not want to, and even for myself, I edit off external SSD drives for my videos. I would just want the extra room if I wanted to do a quick project, and 512 gigabytes for me might be a little too tight. I would also upgrade to the 10 gigabyte Ethernet to future-proof. That brings my total to, you guessed it, $19.99, the exact same price, and I get 1 terabyte versus 512 gigabytes of SSD, get the same CPU cores, but I do get less GPU cores. Now that is for my personal order if I were to upgrade. Now let's tweak this and get the specs a bit closer to see what happens. If I make the SSD storage the same as the Mac Studio to 512 gigabytes and upgrade the CPU cores and GPU cores, keep the 10 gigabyte Ethernet upgrade, the cost of the Mac Mini M2 Pro is now at $2,099. Whew, the struggle is real. Okay, some decisions. I stand beside recommending the Mac Mini M2 or the M2 Pro base models if you're upgrading from an Intel Mac. And what you are doing is a bit sluggish, especially if you are starting YouTube and filming in 4K. If you are not doing cinematic productions, I think the Mac Mini M2 and especially the M2 Pro, you're going to see an instant improvement in performance. If you already have a Mac Mini M1 like me, and you're thinking about upgrading, and you are doing a lot of video editing for YouTube, personal projects, and wanting to streamline your workflow, this is where I got stuck. The reason why is that if Apple updates the Mac Studio, it will most likely have the M2 Max, or better, maybe even an M3 variant. Typically, Apple will keep the cost roughly the same. So if we look at the base model Mac Studio and you switched out the M1 Max to the M2 Max and the price is the same, I would most likely opt for the Mac Studio. So as I said, I might have been too excited too quickly with the Mac Mini M2 and M2 Pro release. In some ways, for the same price, the Mac Studio has its advantages, and note, it is capable of running 5 displays versus only 3 displays with the Mac Mini M2 Pro. But that would be subjective if you need that in your workflow. They will both have the same ports on the back, except the M2 Pro has HDMI 2.1, giving you 4K up to 240 Hz refresh rate. The Mac Studio has the front ports for more connectivity. You can choose either, and I know you would be happy, or do what I probably will do and wait. Wait and see if they introduce a new Mac Studio with an updated M2 Max and Ultra chipsets. Let me know in the comments below, what are your thoughts? What are you going to do? What are you going to choose and why? If you found value in this video, you know what to do. It really helps support the channel. And if you like more content like this one, watch another video over here or over here. Be safe, stay awesome, and I'll catch you in the next one.